Hi, this is Nicholas Hammond, and you're listening to TV Confidential.
Ed Robertson with a reminder that the next edition of TV Confidential will air next week on the station at the usual time. We hope you join us for that. In the meantime, we will close out this week's program by playing part 2 of a conversation that began last week with Christopher Fryer. Christopher Fryer, Robert Crane's longtime collaborator on several books about movies and television, including Crane, Sex, Celebrity, and My Father's Unsolved Murder, and Three-Cornered Circle. Three-Cornered Circle, a screenplay in book form that is also an adaptation of one of the most poignant stories told in Crane, Sex, Celebrity, and My Father's Unsolved Murder, in which Bob must balance the personal high of being hired as John Candy's right-hand man, the biggest break in Bob's career at the time, with the personal struggle faced at home when his wife at the time, landscape designer Kari Hildebrand, found herself battling cancer. Three-Cornered Circle available ebook, paperback, wherever books are sold, through Amazon.com. As we pick up our conversation with Christopher Fryer, Chris was about to share
just a couple of interesting stories about John that typify him, and they were just great experiences. One of which was being in a car. Bob was working in New York with John. John was making, I think it was Delirious, but I might be wrong about that. I think it was Delirious. And I came in, they were in the city, and I came down. I live up in the Hudson Valley, which is north of New York City. And so I went into the city to see Bob, and we saw John, and Bob had another friend who was in town, and he got tickets to see the Ringo Starr All-Star Band, Ringo Starr and his All-Star Band, which they were playing out in New Jersey somewhere. And we were going to just head out and go see it. John heard that we were going, and he wanted to come. So anytime John was involved, things became a little more complicated.
Yes.
So then all of a sudden, we had to have a limo, and we had to have them pick us up at the hotel and everything. And because John was supposed to do an interview with Bob Costas, Costas was invited to come along. So now, if you can imagine, it's Bob and me and John Candy and Bob Costas in the back of a limo, stuck in traffic on the Garden State Parkway, heading down to, I forget the name of the venue. But anyway, we're stuck in traffic. And so the four of us are sitting in the limo, and Costas starts to interview John, and he leads with the question, so how long have you known you were a lesbian? And John, being a Second City guy, and the first commandment of Second City is never deny.
Yes.
You always go with the premise. Mm-hmm. John launched into this long talk about how he knew from being, even as a young kid, that he would never want anything, I'm going to use an incorrect word here, but he knew from a very young age that he would never want anything but so he knew he was a lesbian from a very young age. It just kind of typifies his humor, his quickness, and the way he just went with the premise. It was hilarious. The other great story that I have about John is that Bob was staying at John's house in Toronto, his farm. He had a farm outside of Toronto, and I flew up to Toronto and went over to visit. And Bob said, "John's making dinner for us, so come for dinner." John's making his special family recipe stew that had chicken and sausages, and it was just this old family recipe. And I said, great. And I said, what time should I be there? And he said, well, we're going to eat around 7. So I get out to the farm, which is out north of Toronto, and Bob and I are sitting around. We go over to John's house. Bob was staying in the guest house. And we go to the house at, 6:30, and Bob and I have a beer, and John is having his usual rum and Coke. And, he's telling us stories, and we're sitting by the fire. This was late in the fall, and we're sitting by the fire, and John's telling the stories, and we're just having a great time. And 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, John keeps refilling his glass. Bob's refilling his glass. We're having some beers. 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. The fire is burnt down. It's just embers. We're throwing more wood on the fire. Bob and I are looking at each other. John's had about 15 rum and Cokes. I've had more beers than I can count. And we're waiting and waiting. And around 2 a.m., John goes in and goes, "Yeah, I think it's ready." At which point, neither Bob nor I have any appetite at all. We're trying to stay awake. We need like the Clockwork Orange things on our eyelids to keep our eyelids open. And John dishes up the food, and he sits down back on the couch with his rum and Coke. And we go, "What? You're not eating?" He says, "Nah, I'll eat later."
Well, it sounds like a liquid form of turducken. It sounds very good.
Anyway, it was great, as I recall, but at that point I was really not. I mean, I do eat late. My wife and I eat dinner, 8, 9 o'clock, but 2 a.m. is a little late for dinner, even for me.
That's right. That's a little late. It's a great story. One of my other, and again, it's very difficult because, as we said before, you have to write with economy, and you can't always go into the type of depth that you can if you're writing in long-form prose, as you normally do, and as you did with Crane's Sex, Celebrity, and My Father's Unsolved Murder. But one of my favorite scenes in that book, and you include it in Three-Quartered Circle, Chris, it's the moment at the Oscars where, as George Costanza would say, worlds collide. John and Jack Nicholson meet each other off stage before one of them are presenting. And even though Bob is connected to both Nicholson and John, it's one of those moments in his life where Bob is reminded he's really on the fringes of celebrity.
Yeah, it's one of those things where Bob always talks about it as the club. And it's the club of actors. And all actors, whether they know each other or not, they're in this club. And it's an exclusive club. And if you're in it and you're welcomed. If you're not in it, you're invisible. And this is a moment when John Candy is walking backstage at the Oscars. I think it's before he presents the award for Best Short Subject, which the producers thought was funny. John's having a cigarette because he's nervous, and Bob's with him, and they hear, "Hey, Johnny." And Jack Nicholson comes over to talk to John. Now, they've never met, but they're in the club together.
Yeah.
So Bob has, of course, written a book about Jack Nicholson and spent hours with him when we did our book in Jack Nicholson's living room. And yet, when John and Jack are standing together and Bob is right there, John never introduces Bob. Bob never says anything,
yeah.
And Jack never looks at Bob, so there's no conversation because Bob's not in the club. And it's one of those moments where you go, "Come on!" But that's it. That's what it's all about.
That is what it's all about.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit frontporchrealtygroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
One more item. If you're starting a company, particularly one that is in an emerging market, you know that averting any sort of legal dispute is crucial to your business plan. Our friends at Tectonic Law offer an array of services that can help you avoid and preempt future litigation while also developing and protecting your intellectual property and intangible assets. Tectonic Law serves the needs of a host of emerging industries throughout California and beyond, including industrial designers, beverage makers, artists, farmers, retail stores, health practitioners, wellness experts, cosmetics manufacturers, nonprofit organizations, innovators in sustainable practices, and libraries. Go to tectoniclaw.com to learn more about how Tectonic Law can help your business thrive. tectoniclaw.com. Rock solid representation for groundbreaking industries.
Hi, this is Shirley Jones, and you're listening to TV Confidential.
They sent the script to Charlie. He read it. He called me. He said, this time you can't turn it down. You must do it. And I said, oh, all right, send it to me. Okay. So they sent it to me, and I read it. And it was true. It was wonderful. And then I said, well, I think I also need to meet John Candy. So John was up in
Chicago.
No, you were in...
We were in Chicago.
But you flew into Chicago, didn't you,
yes.
from Canada?
She
and
says you were in Chicago. You were in Chicago.
I just go along.
Yeah.
I just go along with it.
And I flew into Chicago, and this time it was like 50 seconds. I just looked at him, I looked into those gorgeous eyes, and I said, yes, I'll be his mom.
Boy, that's nice. The eyes did it, huh?
That's right. Wait till you see this picture. John Candy comes into his own as a fine, dramatic actor. And just you wait. In a little while, he's too young right now, but very soon, John Candy is going to be doing all the great roles that Charles Lawton has done. He's going to be doing Witness for the Prosecution and all the marvelous roles. He is a fantastic actor.
You listen to Mother.
And again, you touch on this briefly in Three-Cornered Circle, but it evoked a memory for me because I know the backstory of it. You mentioned that sometimes John said, "Okay, I want to do this," and he can because he was John Candy, and so he decided it was '89 and the Super Bowl was up at Stanford. I forget where the Super Bowl was played, but the 49ers were playing Cincinnati, and John decided he wants to go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
and you touch on that briefly in Three-Cornered Circle. It reminded me of the famous moment. It's the last 2 minutes of the game. The 49ers are trailing, and they're driving. They're inside the 20. Montana looks up, and he sees John Candy clear as day in between the goalposts.
Yeah. And he says in the huddle, I think he says in the huddle, "Hey, John Candy's up there." Or like that.
Yeah. And it's like it's one of those cool. It has nothing to do with Three-Cornered Circle per se. But it's part of the legend of Joe Montana that he wasn't worried about the moment and the drive. He was just he was and then next okay they break the huddle and then he throws the pass to John Taylor and they win the game. You know. So,
yeah. And it speaks too of the outsize, no pun intended, but the outsize celebrity of John Candy and just the outsized personality of John Candy. He was beloved, and one time Bob and I, John was part owner of the Toronto Argonauts, the football team. And Bob invited me to come to, I don't remember if it was the opening game, I think it was the opening game of the season. And so I went up to Toronto, and we went to the game, and John had, of course, a box, and we watched the game. And John had this personal trainer. John was quite an athlete. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily guess it looking at him, but he was very athletic. And he had this guy who was a former football player. His name was Kelvin Prunster, and massive human being. He was about 6'6" and 280, but just a massive. Muscular guy. I think he was a tight end or something like that when he played football. And so he was kind of John's bodyguard but he was personal trainer for John. And he was there, and then there were some other people there. This fellow who now works for Live Nation named Brett Gallagher, who's a big guy too. when we left the game, and we're walking out through the stadium, people see John Candy and they go crazy, and they want to come up. So we formed this wedge, Bob and me and Brett and Kelvin. Kelvin was kind of the point of the wedge, and we made this wedge, and John walked kind of in the hollow of the wedge. But people were just gobsmacked that John Candy is walking and they're yelling and he's waving and everything. But he needed that to get in and out of venues.
Yeah. Well, again, you give the readers a sense of who John was and the world he inhabited, and the essential role Bob played during the time they worked together, and it's part of the narrative that drives Three-Cornered Circle. Three-Cornered Circle now available in paperback and as an ebook through Killfee Publishing as well as Amazon.com. Christopher Fryer, Robert Crame's co-author. Anything else you want to share?
Nothing that I can think of. Those are my great memories of being with John, hanging out with John and Bob. He was always unbelievably generous and hospitable to me. Whenever I'd show up, I was always greeted with a great big hug. It was like I was part of the family, and I feel very grateful that I got to spend as much time as I did with him and with Bob. It was great. He was just a really nice human being, and having spent a lot of time with celebrities and film people, I wouldn't say that about many of them, but John Candy is and was just a great human being, and he was a pleasure to be around.
Okay, and you're a pleasure to chat with, Chris, and I look forward to the next time you and I can have a chat on our show.
Yeah, and maybe in 40 years I'll have that
Three-Cornered Circle available paperback and as an ebook through Killfee Publishing and Amazon.com. That's Robert Tindall, Tony Figueroa, Donna Allen, Bill Grice, and Susan Silver. Thank you so much for listening. Stay healthy, stay safe. We'll talk to you next time on TV Confidential.